Let's talk Vcores. Up until about 4 days ago, I had no idea when I was going to get my hands on these. I obviously saw all the content that was coming out about them, so I thought I was going to miss the boat. But my rep came in super clutch, got me these. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about them, but it's not going to be a normal review. I thought I would maybe expedite the review, try to get something out on the 98 as soon as possible, but there is a lot to talk about here, so I want to take a bit more time with them. So this is going to be more of a first impressions, and I'm going to talk about all three of these rackets. What I have is the 98, the 100, and the 100D. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets and Runners. So I can't tell you how excited I was when I found out I was actually going to get these rackets sooner rather than later. I really had no idea when we'd get them. I thought it might be in January, but no, I got my hands on them early. The full reviews for these rackets will be coming where, you know, we do my normal review style. I don't really have anything scripted. I have a few notes here and there. I'll read through the specs and all that. So hopefully you guys enjoy this. It's a little bit different. Obviously I've tried to organize my thoughts, but it's going to be probably a little bit sloppier than usual. But yeah, I'm super excited to talk about Vcores. Now, I will admit the Vcore line is not a racket line I tend to play very well with. Now, kind of a similar thing here with this playtest. It definitely wasn't my highest level of tennis, but I think I actually did play a little bit better than I did with the previous one. And that's because honestly, things have changed a lot. Now, this is one thing Yonex is consistently good at doing. When they release a new racket, they actually do major updates, unlike some of the other brands. Now, I will just tell you, I had these strung with Polytour Strike at 53 pounds. I'm a big fan of Polytour Strike. I think it's sort of RPM-esque in its snapback and feel. Maybe a little bit softer and a little bit less snapback and spin, but a very good string. So yeah, it was a really, really fun playtest. And now I'm going to read through the specs. Okay, so I got a lot of Vcores here. What I have here are the two 98s. I think the 98 generally gets the most interest, so I'll start with that. Still a 305 gram, 98 square inch, 16 by 19. That hasn't changed. Now I'm gonna read through the stuff that's changed. So the big one is the well, no, actually that's probably not the biggest thing, but I'll start with the stiffness. The old Vcore 98 was today when I tested it flexing at 62 RA. The new one is at 60, so that means this is clearly a little bit softer. Now, swing weight, okay, take this with a grain of salt, but previous 98, I had our high swinging demo. Unfortunately, we got one that was really off spec. That's the one that I was able to string up and test alongside the new one. This one was 328. Now, I think the target swing weight of the old Vcore 98 was more around 320, maybe a little bit higher than that. And that's exactly what this one swings at, 320. And that's without a dampener, by the way, on both of these. So that's swing weight. And then the biggest change, and this is where Yonex always updates things pretty much consistently, is the beam. So the old 98 was 23 millimeters up here, 23 millimeters here, and then 21 millimeters in the throat. So quite a thin throat. This new one is 23 millimeters up here, 23.5 down here in the lower hoop. So a little bit thicker there. And then 22 millimeters in the throat. And you can definitely tell the throat has gotten thicker. It's shaped a little bit differently too in the throat here. There's no more of these aerodynamic grooves on the new one, which is kind of interesting. But it's a more substantial looking throat. Then, I know it might not look that obvious on camera, but they have reshaped the hoop a little bit. They kind of just doubled down on what they did to the previous Vcore 98. Like the big change on the last one was they made it, you know, wider at 10 and 2 here. So they kind of doubled down on that, making it even wider here at 10 and 2. So even more mass in the upper hoop. And then this is a really subtle change that I picked up on, but it's gonna make sense later when I read through some of the marketing. The beam in the hoop, it's a little bit boxier on the old one. Here, it is much more kind of rounded off and a little bit more aerodynamic. That's pretty much the major changes. Now I'm gonna move on to the 100s. Okay, so the new Vcore 100, similar thing again as the 98, same static weight, 300 grams, same head size, 100 square inches, and the same string pattern, 16 by 19 as the previous one. And actually, these two rackets have an identical stiffness. This one was flexing at 62. This new one is also flexing at 62, which is interesting because they did soften up the 98, but the big change here is the beam thickness. It's even bigger of a change than on the 98. So the previous Vcore 100 had a 23.5, 23.5, and 22 millimeter beam. Honestly, thinner than I remember. That's almost player's racket thin on, you know, quite a powerful and spin-friendly frame. But now 24 millimeters up here, 26 in the lower hoop, and 23 in the throat. So that got significantly thicker, and that is super important when I'm going to start talking about the playability. Now I'm going to quickly read off the specs on the brand new Vcore 100D, because I know a lot of you are probably going to be excited about that. Now I'm not sure we're going to bring it in, so I can't talk about it too much, but I will mention it at the end of the video because I did play with it. So I'm just going to quickly read off the specs for you. This racket weighs 5 grams more than the standard 100, so it's 305 grams, which is pretty typical when a brand makes a denser string pattern version of a racket. Obviously, it's a 100 square inch racket as well. I think it has an identical shape to the standard 100. Identical shape, identical beam, all that. The big thing is obviously the denser string pattern here. This is a 16 by 20, not a 16-19. Now, that's obviously not a huge difference, but what I will say is on court there is a pretty noticeable difference in playability between the two. But yeah, that's it for the specs. Lots of changes. Now I want to move on to some of the marketing, because it's always nice to see what a brand was attempting to do with the racket. So first of all, sweet spot. The new upper frame design maximizes the sweet spot for more consistent spin and fewer miss hits, delivering unprecedented spin performance. Okay, new upper frame being more open maximizes the sweet spot, makes it bigger, basically, for fewer miss hits. I mean, that makes sense. If your sweet spot's bigger, you're technically going to have fewer miss hits. More consistent spin. I don't really know what that means. Snapback. The new Yonex grommet structure expands string movement, generating greater snapback for higher ball rotation and enhanced spin performance. I unfortunately don't have anything regarding the technology here. If it's like the silicone oil infused grommets that were in the previous one, which talk about that a little bit in the spin section of each racket, then it's obviously very effective. But I am curious to see the technology there, because it does feel a little bit different on spin shots to me. And then speed. The redesigned frame reduces air resistance for smoother swings, producing sharper spin on every shot, regardless of swing style or power. Okay, this is interesting to me. These frames are bigger than the previous one. They also don't have the like aerodynamic fins, I think they were called, or something, that the previous one had. Not that I think those did much, but the one thing I will say is, because the beam there, I was talking about it being less boxy in the upper hoop, they don't actually feel slower than the previous one. I don't think these are the fastest rackets in the world, and I'll get more into that in a bit, but I can see what they were doing there by rounding out the shape of the beam in the hoop there, making it a little bit more aerodynamic and less boxy. Okay, and then stability. By combining Yonex's unique graphite technologies, including servo filter, 2G NAMD, flex force, and VDM, power, stability, and ball hold are optimized. Okay, so it sounds like what they're trying to say here, especially with ball hold, is maybe a longer dwell time. Yes, these rackets have a longer dwell time. So they succeeded in that. Again, we'll talk about that more in a second. But then they just finished this section off by saying the new Vcore grips the ball with high hold performance, enabling more powerful and stable high spin shots. Okay, yeah, that just doubles down on what I was just talking about. Yeah, very interesting. I hadn't actually read this marketing until after playing with them, but it adds up to my experience on court. Now that's it for all the marketing and the specs and everything. Now I'm gonna get into the performance, and I'm gonna go through each racket. I'll talk about all three. Yeah, let's start with the Vcore 98. Okay, so let's start with the 98. I think this is the one most people wanna hear about. The difference in feel here is enormous. This older Vcore was quite muted, but because it had this thinner beam, and especially the thinner throat, it had this pretty flexible feel to it. And it also had, not a small sweet spot, but a pretty well-defined sweet spot for such a muted racket. You knew when you were hitting in the sweet spot, the ball was in and out of there quite efficiently, and it was a nice overall experience, albeit a little bit muted. Now this is very, very different, okay? The dwell time, first of all, is much longer. If that one was kind of like poppy, like the ball is in and out of there, muted but poppy, this one is more hollow, and it is still quite dampened, but not in the same flexy, muted way. This is like a boom, kind of has that like almost rubbery sensation to it. You feel the ball go deep and then it launches out. So it's a more complex feel experience than the previous one. This is a longer dwell time, for sure. And that makes sense. They softened it up. They didn't really take away any of the dampening. Now, the other thing that was super obvious here was the sweet spot size, okay? Remember how I said this 98 was very well defined? The sweet spot wasn't small. It's definitely not a small sweet spot racket, but you knew when you were hitting in the sweet spot. You had that nice definition. The ball, you knew what your ball was going to do when it came out. Now this has a much bigger sweet spot, and this is where I think I need to play around with strings, tension a little bit more to see if I can dial it in. I'm not against a big sweet spot, but I do think it's a little bit too ambiguous. It's not quite as rewarding as the previous one. And that makes sense. Things have gotten bigger, things have gotten thicker, it's gotten wider in the upper hoop. So I think if I were to maybe string this up with a stiffer poly, or maybe just go a little bit tighter with my string tension, that would concentrate things into the sweet spot a little bit more, make that sweet spot itself a little bit more defined, just make things a little bit more precise. And I will talk about control in a second here, but that was the big thing here. This thing has a much larger sweet spot. And on that theme, we're going to move on to power, because Yonex has created a weapon here. And it's funny because I thought this racket was a really good example of a modern player's frame that's, you know, a really powerful 98. Obviously, a lot of players are wanting more power on these 98 square inch rackets. That's just the way tennis is going. But this takes it in a whole different, like a whole, it's a whole new level for me. Like the previous 98, powerful racket, but this thing rips the ball. The sound this makes, and it goes back to the feel thing I was saying, where there's like a long dwell time, but it feels like it loads up on power during that dwell time, and it just absolutely annihilates the ball. You can hit massive shots with this thing. You know, what I was saying about the previous one being a little bit flexy, this one, despite being softer, feels more resilient to the ball's impact. You feel like the racket is resisting the ball more, despite being softer. I know that's a little bit confusing, but when you get a hold of it, it hits the ball extremely hard. Now the flip side of that, and this is where it might not be a good thing for some players, is the easy depth here. I don't remember a 98 square inch racket that pushes the ball this deep. It almost feels like a 100 in terms of the easy depth, and I'm not talking like a Gravity Pro, I'm talking like pure drive style rackets in terms of the easy depth. So that's a good thing for forgivingness, I guess, but I almost wish they'd found a way to go for that higher top end power potential without putting too much easy depth, because there is definitely for me a slight problem of control here. Now, this is a Vcore, it's a spin racket, and now very clearly trying to be a power oriented 98 too. But control it's not lacking, but it's definitely not on the level that the previous one was. Obviously, this wasn't a control racket, but one of the things this Vcore did such a good job of was when you did decide to flatten it out and try to like hit spots, because it was so stable and it did have that like flexible feel with a really well-defined sweet spot, it was a bit of a laser. And I think that was sacrificed a little bit here on this new Vcore, especially because of the bigger sweet spot and that easy depth, because this thing has a much higher launch angle. And I think that's why I don't feel quite as confident for those control-oriented shots, especially those flatter shots, because a higher launch angle can cause the ball to fly on you a little bit. So in terms of flat control and precision, that's the biggest sacrifice they made. Now, again, that's something I think could be fixed with different strings, different tension, just playing around with it a little bit. But control would be what I struggled most with. And yeah, I was launching balls about 2 feet deep very consistently. This is part of why it doesn't necessarily work for my game, is that I do kind of try to hit with depth and not necessarily always with the most spin. And that's where it was sailing long with this racket, whereas it didn't sail as long on the previous one. But again, that's kind of a normal sacrifice you're going to make when you make a racket this much more powerful, because it is significantly more powerful. So control has gotten a little bit worse, I guess you could say. But the big thing with a Vcore is it's a spin racket. So flat control, precision, you don't necessarily need them if you have a very spin-oriented game. Now, you read their marketing there, talking about how it grips the ball more. And that's exactly what it does, okay? It's interesting. I think this is part of why it has that higher launch angle, but they have clearly made this a racket that they want it to have a longer ball pocketing so you can shape the ball a little bit more. Hitting spin with this, with the old one, is a phenomenal experience, because they have those really slick grommets, but it's more of like an instantaneous, like the strings are gonna snap in and out, boom, and the ball's out of there. This is like, they want you to really grab a hold of it and brush up. The problem I had is that if I didn't do that fast enough, so if my stroke was a little too slow, that's where, you know, I'd be trying to do the brush up motion, but then the ball would like shoot out, and that's where I would get too much depth. That's where the ball would go long. Again, I think I might need to try different strings here, but it does feel like either you need a super fast stroke, you need to be a really high level player and just rip the ball. But for me, and this happened especially when I was trying to go for low balls, go low to high, I either needed to like just whip it through almost unnaturally, or the ball would go out. So this spin thing is definitely something I want to spend a little bit more time with for the full review to try to actually figure out which one is more spin friendly. But what I will say is noticeably easier snapback here, a grabbier spinny feel on the new one, and I don't get quite as clean of a snapback, if that makes sense. And that goes along with all the changes they've made about making the dwell time a little bit longer, the ball going deeper into the racket, all that stuff. This just feels like a cleaner overall hitting experience in the spin game. So yeah, that is the Vcore 98. One thing I want to like really make clear here is this thing being a weapon. Like, this thing rips the ball. Like, it rips the ball. I know maybe the control section is a little bit negative here, but the amount of power you can generate here is not normal for a 98 scoring track. I mean, this generates more than the Aero 98. This generates way more top end power than the EZone 98. Like, if you think the EZone 98 is their power oriented 98 scoring racket, no. It's this guy. This thing is an absolute weapon. So that was super impressive, and I think a lot of people are going to like that because of, you know, the trend in tennis right now where we want rackets to become more powerful, especially 98 scoring rackets. So yeah, a very interesting update. I can't wait to test it more and figure out, you know, the rest of what I want to say. But now let's move on to the 100s. Okay, so moving on to the 100s, and keep in mind, I'm not the biggest expert when it comes to the previous Vcore 100. Just not a racket I mesh very well with. I don't love these 100 square inch rackets that have like a ton of mass in the upper hoop. That doesn't make any sense because I'm such a huge fan of the Gravity Pro. I don't know. This shape never worked with me that well. But let's talk about power again, because that is the number one biggest change again. This racket is incredibly powerful. I mean, you can just let the racket do the work and it will, yes, a lot of easy depth, but also a lot of top end power. Like, the rip ability with this racket is off the charts. And you know what? I think I like that more on the 100 than I do on the 98 so far. And that's because in my head, I think 98 score inch racket, yes, I want it to be powerful, but I still want a certain element of control to it. You know, with a 100 square inch racket that has this beam thickness that is, you know, this big, I'm not really thinking like flat directional control that much. So having this much power, I just don't think it comes at the expense of too much playability, because it just naturally wouldn't be that controlled. Hopefully that makes sense. The stability, again, is extremely impressive for a 100 square inch, 300 gram racket. So like the 98, the stability is there, but yeah, the flat precision, all that, not this racket's forte. Let's just put it that way. It has a high launch angle. It has kind of a long, ambiguous dwell time with a big sweet spot. So it's not gonna be a laser beam. I don't think anybody's expecting a Vcore 100 to be a laser beam, especially when it did get thicker. But the power is, it's pretty awesome. Now, here's a little caveat with this racket. As you can see, like, let's look at this compared to a normal 100 square inch racket, I guess you could say. This is the Vcore 100. This is the old Pure Drive. You see how much more mass there is in the upper hoop here? Well, when you take a 100 and you put a lot of mass in the upper hoop, that kind of compounds the issue of the racket being clunky. Now, this isn't a slow racket. I want to make that clear. But it's definitely not a fast racket. And I did struggle a little bit, you know, while I was playing to just really accelerate my swing speed, feel like I had like extreme control over the tip of the frame. And that's something I think I could get used to with more time, but it makes sense, you know, thick beam racket, lots of mass in the upper hoop. It's kind of like a Boom MP. I don't think it's as clunky as a Boom MP. I want to make that clear, but a little bit, you know, it does have a slower swing speed. And there were times when I didn't accelerate this racket enough. It would push the ball so deep that I was just like, I have no control right now. But if you generate the necessary swing speed, the spin here is pretty much automatic. Now, I'm still figuring it out on the 98. I think I made that abundantly clear. But the spin here, whew, there's a lot of it. And I think part of that is maybe because it's a little bit stiffer than the 98. So it doesn't grab onto the ball for as long. So it's a little bit like what I was saying with the previous 98, where it's a little bit more efficient transfer of spin from your technique into the ball. But yeah, I mean, this thing, just let the racket do the work and you will produce a spinny ball. So yeah, it's a really fun racket. So with that said, let's move on to the 100D. Okay, now I'm not going to talk about this racket too much because I don't know if we're carrying it or not. But it's a good racket. It's a really good racket. Think Vcore 100, what I just said, but with a lower launch angle. This thing has the lowest launch of all three by far. A cleaner feel, that I want to talk a little bit more about. So the cleaner feel, I think, comes because, one, the string bed is denser, so the sweet spot gets concentrated into a smaller area. I mean, that's a typical thing that happens on denser string beds. So you feel the sweet spot a little bit more. And also, this one is 1 point stiffer. Ooh, I don't know if I read off the specs for this one. This one has a 63 RA. The standard 100 has a 62 RA. I don't usually feel differences, 1 point difference in stiffness, but I actually did think I felt it here. Now, part of that could be the denser string bed just making it feel a little bit, I don't know, more solid, but that is the way I would describe this racket. It is more solid than the 100. So for directional control, I'm not going to say that one cross is like a crazy massive difference, but it kind of felt like it. Like I could rip the ball flat pretty well with this racket. What I will say is, in terms of spin, there is noticeably less purchase over the ball here. I mean, it might also be that I was overcompensating for the higher launch angles of the 100 and the 98, but there were a lot of times with this one where I was putting it into the net, whereas with the other ones, it would have gone over, like, by quite some margin over the net. That being said, I don't want anybody to think the spin is lacking here. It definitely isn't lacking, but it's less of that grippy spin. And again, it is stiffer, so it's not going to hold on to the ball as long. But yeah, I mean, when you do hit a proper spinny shot, produces a lot of spin. It's not like that one cross is going to make a world of difference there, but it does feel like that one cross makes a world of difference for precision. And that's the big thing here, as I do think this racket has more variety. I mean, it could also be that it's 5 grams heavier, so it's more stable, maybe a little bit cleaner feeling because of that too. But yeah, I mean, it's when you do flatten it out, I think this is the best performer of the three, and this is a 100 score inch racket. The 98 should theoretically be the best performer, but yeah, this one has a lot of variety. It's a really, really good racket. This one may be teetering on a little stiff feeling, like discomfort I'm talking. I don't know. I don't think any of these are particularly uncomfortable. I'd actually say that the previous Vcore was noticeably harsher, I guess would be the word. But this one would be definitely the stiffest of the three. But the 100D is a pretty cool racket. And yeah, I don't know if I'll be talking about it ever again, but I enjoyed my experience hitting with it so far. So yeah, those are the 3 Vcores, but there will be full reviews for at least 2 of these rackets at some point in the next month and a half, I want to say. I might wait until we get stock of the new Vcores to make a full review, but yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff coming right now. So super excited. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Let me know if you did like this style. I know it's a little bit different. I mean, it's obviously very different. I could start making, introductory videos to rackets like this and then full reviews at some point later. But yeah, that's the new Vcores. As you can tell, the big update is more power. Spin is different, but more power, much more power. So I think if it was the type of racket that I was comfortable swinging loose with, which is just a problem I have with Vcores, not this one in particular, yeah, it would be an absolute weapon. So I think, yeah, people are going to like this racket a lot. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. And remember, well, we don't have them now, but remember, if you do want to check out these new Vcores once they do come out, you can come visit us in store, or you can check them out online at racketsandrunners.ca.